Thank you for coming to listen to us, to learn. And because it's late in the evening or late in the day, and I know you've all been here all day, we will make this quite short but very precise. We will have a short question and answer session at the very end of our presentation, so feel free to jot down questions you may have. And I would like to start with a short introduction of who we are, because maybe some of you don't know what ICLA is and what Citizens Movement Pax Europa is. So let me give you a short overview. The International Civil Liberties Alliance began several years ago as an informal coordinating body for various civil liberties groups in Europe and North America. At the Brussels conference in July 2012, just a couple of months ago, it was relaunched with a more defined structure. The organization is now based in Switzerland and has chapters in various Western European countries, in Canada, in the United States, and in Australia. As explained in its mission statement, which you can find on our website, libertiesalliance.org, ICLA is a human rights organization that aims to uphold democracy, freedom, and individual liberties. We oppose all forms of illiberal repression, but because Sharia, which is Islamic sacred law, poses the greatest threat to liberty in the world today, much of our focus is naturally on preventing the implementation of Sharia in Western societies. We remain a clearinghouse for various private volunteer organizations. We act as a network of networks to help individuals and groups come together, exchange information, and undertake common initiatives. In the spirit of the liberties we so vigorously defend, we decline to enforce ideological conformity among our component groups. We ask only that they share our commitment to freedom and individual rights. About Bürgerbewegung Pax Europa. In English, it's called Citizens Movement Pax Europa. BPE is foremost a European civil rights movement and human rights organization. Our objectives are democratic, free, and secular rule of law in our countries. We are defending vigorously the values of the Enlightenment. We're keeping people informed about the challenges of Islamization to our free and democratic order through lectures, panel discussions, and conferences. We are also a registered lobby in the German Bundestag. What is important to mention in this context is that we are fully independent and we are non-partisan. We stress that there is absolutely no room for any right-wing or left-wing extremism or xenophobia within our organization. And before we proceed to introduce the Brussels Declaration as well as the Brussels process and what this is all about, there is the need for some background information about the two sets of human rights that are currently in use at the United Nations and quite a few other international organizations. You might wonder what I'm talking about, but I'm asking you to bear with me. The creators of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 envisaged the concept to be truly universal. However, a number of states voiced their reservations, notably Saudi Arabia because of its apostasy laws. We will see later why Saudi Arabia did not sign the declaration. And today we are confronted with two parallel sets of human rights, a fact that most of us are unaware of. A survey among policymakers and government officials would undoubtedly prove that they have never heard of the existence of the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights in Islam. I will now turn over to my colleague Alain, who will explain to you with the help of a PowerPoint presentation the two sets of human rights and why this is dangerous. Alain?
Thank you, Elisabeth. Well, the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights in Islam was adopted by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It was not the name at this time. Islamic Organization of Islamic Cooperation changed name recently. So it was adopted in 1990. In the preamble of this document, we have a very interesting statement. Keenly, this is the text of this declaration. Keenly aware of the place of mankind in Islam as vice-regent of Allah on earth. From the start, we see that this declaration considers mankind in Islam as vice-regent, that is, kind of sub-commander of Allah on earth. It raises the issue of equality. Following in the preamble, agrees to issue the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights in Islam that will serve as a general guidance for member states in the field of human rights. General guidance, that is, the signatories of this declaration agrees to follow the rules defined in this declaration, and especially in the field of human rights, which is interesting in this assembly. Always in preamble, agrees to issue the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights in Islam that will serve as a general guidance. So, human rights, I emphasize the human rights importance. Recognizing the importance of issuing a document on human rights in Islam that will serve as a guide again, not the word, for member states in all aspects of life, which is encompass more than only human rights, religion plus politics. This Cairo Declaration clearly set a second definition of the human rights, and we will look at the content of this declaration. It won't be an exhaustive examination of this declaration, but only the key points, and you will see that they are raising some issues again. Article 1. All men are equal in terms of basic human dignity and basic obligation and responsibilities. Rights. Where is the word rights? Equal in terms of basic human dignity. We speak about human rights, and we have no mention of right, equal right for everybody. Article 1. All human beings are Allah's subjects. It raises the issue of freedom. If you don't consider yourself as a subject of Allah, you have a problem. Yes, subject of Allah, freedom of religion. In the USA human right, you have freedom of religion. It's a fundamental right. It seems to be ignored in this declaration. And no one has superiority over another except on the basis of pity and good deeds. It raises an issue about democracy. If you have no authority over people except on the basis of pity and good deeds, how can you work a democratic state where the states, by the power of the law, have authority over people? It is prohibited to take away life except for a Sharia prescribed reason. Self-explanatory. Sharia gives reason to take away life. And we will see Sharia prescribed reasons. So when we speak about Sharia, usually a lot of people try to explain to you that there is no common Sharia for everybody. Islam is very different and practice is very different around countries. But in this document you will note that all people of OIC, that is anti-Muslim community, speak about Sharia, not Sharias. Sharia, there is apparently for them a Sharia. And this Sharia gives prescripted reason to kill people. What kind of So I will use a document, an official document, Radiance of the Traveler and Tools of the Worshipper. This is a classical manual of Islamic sacred law. This translation was certified by Al-Azhar University. So we can consider it as an official document which has some value. So, when a person who has reached puberty and sane voluntarily apostatizes from Islam, he deserves to be killed. This is not a legend. It's a Sharia-prescribed reason to kill people. Another reason, penalty for fornication or sodomy. The legal penalty is obligatory imposed upon anyone who fornicates or commits sodomy. If the offender is someone with the capacity to remain chaste, then he or she is stoned to death. This is not a legend. This is written. This is a Sharia prescribed reason. And jihad. Jihad is a communal obligation. When enough people perform it to successfully accomplish it, it's no longer obligatory upon others. A communal obligation. And what is jihad? Because it seems to have several definitions of jihad. Here we have a definition of jihad. Jihad means to war against non-Muslims. It's signifying warfare to establish the religion. So it's not a legend. It's a Sharia prescribed reason to kill people. So, enough with Sharia, come back to the Cairo Declaration. Article 3. In the event of the use of force and in case of armed conflict, it's not permissible to kill non-belligerents such as old men, women, and children. In the event of use of force, no more precision. You can apparently use force in some occurrence. Killing men, then, seems to be allowed in this case. I remind you that this document is a document speaking of human rights. Article 6. Woman is equal to man in human dignity and has an all rights to enjoy as well as duty to perform. No equality of right. Her own right. She is equal in dignity, not in right. Article 15. Confiscation and sale of property is prohibited except for a necessity dictated by law. What law? Sharia law. 17. Everyone shall have the right to live in a clean environment away from vice and moral corruption, and it is incumbent upon state and society in general to afford that right. We see that concepts like vice and moral corruption, which are clearly not universal, should be enforced if you apply this declaration. And the law, once again, is Sharia law. There shall be no crime or punishment except as provided for in the Sharia. The only reference about crime or punishment is Sharia. What about international standard of justice? They have vanished in this declaration. 22. Everyone shall have the right to express his opinion freely in such manner as would not be contrary to the principle of the Sharia law. Where is freedom of speech? 24. All the rights and freedoms stipulated in this declaration are subject to the Islamic Sharia. In case you've missed it, this is very clear. 25. The Islamic Sharia is the only source of reference for the explanation or clarification on any of the articles of this declaration. This is perfectly clear. So, this Cairo Declaration clearly created a second set of human rights. defined and curtailed by the Sharia law. Sharia law. The European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, 13 February of 2003, said Sharia law is incompatible with democratic principles. This is very clear, and for European people, this has force of law. Don't forget that every European state has to respect judgment from this court. This is not my opinion. This is quite official. So, we can deduce from that Cairo Declaration is compatible with the democratic principles and human rights. So, a question is raised. What statute for the Cairo Declaration signatories in OSCE? Endorsing the Cairo Declaration and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the same time is clearly impossible. So, but today, members of OIC signatories of the Cairo Declaration are also OIC members. How is it possible? Well, but we find some explanation. Again, in this book of Sharia, giving a misleading impression means to utter an expression that ostensibly implies one meaning, while intending a different meaning in the expression may also have one that contradicts the ostensive purpose. It's a kind of deception. Well, deception is bad. No. Scholars say that there is no harm in giving a misleading impression if required by an interest countenanced by sacred law, that is Sharia, that is more important than not misleading the person being addressed. This could explain the use of human rights with a dual meaning. We hear human rights as universal human rights. Some people mean human rights as Cairo Declaration human rights. Same word, different meaning. Well, what's the key of this riddle? In the Cairo Declaration preamble, the safeguarding of those fundamental rights are freedom, this is a word for Sharia, I put Sharia, is an individual responsibility of every person and a collective responsibility of the entire human, that is a community of all Muslims on the earth. It's a religious obligation for Ummah to disseminate and promote Sharia law. Some Ummah members are doing exactly that within the OSCE. Using dual words is a way to promote Sharia without saying exactly that. You speak about human rights, but it is not exactly our human right. And that's clearly a problem. International assemblies should address this problem. At some point, you cannot pretend to speak about the same human right when the meaning is clearly different. It needs to be explained. You can be boss, okay, it's your right, but you have to explain what meaning of human right when you use the words human rights. This is very important. Without this condition, any dialogue is absolutely impossible. You cannot speak you cannot discuss honestly if words don't have the same meaning for everybody. It needs to be clarified, and the statute of people endorsing the Cairo Declaration need to be discussed in assemblies where human rights are discussed. It's clearly a necessity. And the Brussels process and Brussels Declaration is a document that address this issue. Blasphemy laws versus freedom of speech in Europe. Oh, well. This is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, their original one. This was in Brussels, in the European Parliament of Brussels, and this was the launching of this declaration. This declaration first recommendations and policies, proposed policies, is an answer to the attempt from OIC to implement the Istanbul process, which is clearly related, kind of repackaging of the blasphemy laws called defamation of religion. Sorry, defamation of religion has been pushed by OIC since more than 10 years now, and it was an attempt to curtail the freedom of speech regarding to Islam doctrine, the Prophet, different subject related to Islam. And as this defamation of religion attempt was receiving a lot of opposition by democratic countries, and quite understandably, because it's a fundamental right, which suffer no curtailing, no discussion. The Istanbul process was designed to present on a different way exactly the same goal, that is, forbid freedom of expression on some subject in Western countries or democracy in the world as a global project. Yes, this is a very important point. We clearly advocate for a total rejection of the Cairo Declaration on human rights as a basis for any discussion on human rights and civil liberty. And if some participants try to use definitions of human rights issued from this Cairo Declaration, it's clearly to be rejected by people endorsing the human rights as they are known.
Let me just add in this context that you have a copy of the Brussels Declaration in front of you. And I invite you to read it carefully. And if you have questions, to please ask us about the Brussels Declaration. You have the text here also. Our goal here is very clear. We want to preserve free speech. Because without free speech, there is no freedom of religion. You have to understand this point. Without free speech, you have no religious freedom. So basically, if you want to curtail our freedom of speech, you're taking away your freedom to practice your religion, or no religion at all. We also want to keep our civil liberties, the ones that were fought for so hard by our ancestors, both here in Europe and in America. we want to keep our human rights, the ones that were adopted in 1948 by the United Nations. We do not want any other human rights. We want democracy. We want liberal democracy. We want those rights to free assembly, we want the rights that are enshrined in the commitments of the OSCE. And if I may remind you that the CSCE back in the early 1970s was so instrumental in bringing human rights to the table, because the Soviet Union was not interested in talking about human rights. They were probably fully aware that if they started talking about human rights, that perhaps communism would not survive. And at the end of the day, communism actually did not survive, also thanks to the CSCE. So even more for the OSCE to promote human rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we call upon these leaders, we did that in Brussels in July, we called upon these leaders and we continue to call upon these leaders to support the Brussels Declaration, to safeguard those very liberties and human rights that I just mentioned. And we invite you also to sign this declaration right here, right now, if you can subscribe to these principles. And like I said, you have them in front of you, so I don't really need to go through this. If it's more comfortable reading like this, that's fine. And if it says here, the honest defender of democracy, we are these defenders of democracy. We want to keep liberal democracy. In this context, we also firmly reject Sharia law in any way, shape, or form. Sharia law is contrary to democratic principles and freedoms that we enjoy currently. And this is not something we're making up here, and as my colleague already mentioned, there was a judgment from the European Court of Human Rights, and I think we better accept that judgment. Because as you all know, I mean, those of you who studied law probably know it even better. If the European Court of Human Rights says something, it trumps national law, especially here in Europe. So, Sharia law is incompatible with democracy. Let me also tell you here about the test of consequences that is mentioned here. This is also something that the OIC continuously tells us, that there are tests of consequences. And one might regard the happenings of the last few days, weeks, as a sort of test of consequences, which we firmly reject. So now comes the declaration itself, that we have launched a Brussels process to counter the Istanbul process. So this is the end of our presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would like to now open the floor. If you have any questions, feel free to ask my colleague.